Hello, my dear students. Welcome to Teacher at Home. Today, class, we are going to learn the second chapter, that is Nazism and the rise. Third chapter, Nazism and the rise of Hitler. In the spring of 1945, a little 11-year-old German boy called Helmut was lying in bed when he overheard his parents discussing something in serious tones. His father, a prominent physician, deliberated with his wife whether the time had come to kill the entire family or if he should commit suicide alone. His father spoke about his fear of revenge, saying, "How the Allies will do to us when they did to the crippled Jews." The next day, he took Helmut to the woods where they spent their last happy time together singing old children's songs. Late Helmut's father shot himself in his office. Helmut remembers that he saw his father's dirty uniform being burned in the family fireplace. So traumatized was he by what he had overheard and what had happened, that he reacted by refusing to eat at home for the following 9 years. He was afraid that his mother might poison him. Although Hamlet had not been realized the audacity his father had been a Nazi and supporter of Adolf Hitler. Many of you will know something about Nazis and Hitler. You probably know of Hitler's determination to make Germany into a mighty power and his ambition of conquering all of Europe. You may have thought that he killed Jews, but Nazism was not one of two isolated acts. It was a system, a structure of ideas around the world and duties. Let us try and understand what Nazism was all about. Let us see why German father killed himself and what the basis of his fear was. In May 1945, Germany surrendered to the Allies, anticipating what was coming. Hitler, his propaganda minister, Goebbels, and his entire family committed suicide by queuing in the Berlin bunker in April. At the end of the war, the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg was set up to prosecute Nazi war criminals for crimes against peace, for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Germany's crime during the war, especially those actions which, that is, Allies aid war were initiated by the UK and France. 1941 was joined by the USSR and USA. Throughout against Axis powers, namely Germany, Italy, and Japan, can be called crimes against humanity, raised a serious moral and ethical question and invited worldwide condemnation. What were these facts? Under the shadow of the Second World War, Germany had waged a genocidal war. Which resulted in the mass murder of selected groups of innocent civilians of Europe. The number of people killed included 6 million Jews, 2 lakh gypsies, 1 million Polish civilians, 70,000 Germans who were considered mentally and physically disabled, besides innumerable political opponents. Nazis devised an unprecedented means of killing people, that is, by gassing them in various killing centers like Auschwitz. The Nuremberg tribunal sentenced only even leading Nazis to death. Many others were imprisoned for life. The retribution did come, yet the punishment of the Nazis was far short of the brutality and extent of their crimes. Allies did not want to be harsh on defeated Germany as they had been after the First World War. Everyone came to feel that the rise of Nazi Germany could be partially traced back to the German experience at the end of the First World War. What was a genocidal mean? Killing on large scale leading to destruction of large sections of people. British birth of the Weimar Republic. Germany, a powerful empire in the early years of 20th century, fought the First World War alongside the Austrian Empire and against the Allies, England, France, and Russia. All joined the war enthusiastically, hoping to gain from a quick victory. Little did they realize that the war would stretch on, eventually draining Europe of all its resources. Germany made initial gains by occupying France and Belgium. However, the Allies, strengthened by the US entry in 1917, won, defeating Germany and the Central Powers in November 1918. The defeat of Imperial Germany and the abdication of the Emperor gave an opportunity to parliamentary parties to recast German polity. A national assembly met at Weimar and established a democratic constitution with a federal structure. Deputies were now elected to the German parliament or Reichstag on the basis of equal and universal votes cast by all adults, including women. This republic, however, was not received well by its own people, largely because of the terms it was forced to accept after Germany's defeat at the end of the First World War. The peace treaty at Versailles with the Allies was a harsh and humiliating peace. Germany lost its overseas colonies, a tenth of its population, 13% of its territories, 75% of iron, 26% of coal to France, Poland, Denmark, Lithuania. The Allied powers demilitarized Germany to weaken its power. The War Guild Clause The War Guild Clause held Germany responsible for the war and damages the Allied countries suffered. Germany was forced to pay compensation amount of 6 billion. The Allied armies also occupied the resource-rich Rhineland for much for the 1920s. Many Germans held the new Weimar Republic responsible for not only the defeat in the war, but the disgrace at Versailles. Effects of the war. The war had a devastating impact on the entire continent, both physiologically and financially. From a continent of predators, Europe turned into one of the debtors. Unfortunately, the infant Weimar Republic was being made to pay for the sins of the old empire. The Republic carried the burden of the war guilt and national humiliation and was financially crippled by being forced to pay compensation. Those who supported the Weimar Republic, mainly socialist Catholics, Democrats, became easy targets of attack in the conservative nationalist circles. They were mockingly called the November criminals. The mindset had a major impact on the political development of the early 1930s as we will soon see. The First World War left a deep imprint on European society and polity. Soldiers came to be placed above civilians. Politicians and publicists laid great stress on the need for men to be aggressive, strong, and masculine. The media glorified trench life. The truth, however, was the soldiers lived miserable lives in the trenches, trapped with the rats feeding on corpses. They faced poisonous gas and enemy shelling, and witnessed their ranks reduced rapidly. Aggressive war propaganda and national honor occupied center stage in the public sphere, while popular support grew for conservative dictatorship that had recently come into being. Democracy was indeed a young and fragile idea which could not survive the instabilities of interwar Europe. Political, political radicalism and economic crisis. The birth of the Weimar Republic coincided with the revolutionary uprising of the Spartakist League on the pattern of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Soviets of workers and sailors were established in many cities. The political atmosphere in Berlin was charged with demands for Soviet style governance. Those opposed to this, such as the Socialists, Democrats, and Catholics, met in Weimar to give shape to the Democratic Republic. The Weimar Republic crushed the uprising with the help of a war veterans organization called Free Corps. Anarchist Spartacists later found the Communist Party of Germany. Communists and socialists henceforth became irreconcilable enemies and could not make common cause against Hitler. Both the revolutionaries and militant nationalists craved for radical solution. Political radicalization was only heightened by the economic crisis of 1923. Germany had fought the war largely on loans and had to pay war reparations in gold. The depleted gold reserves at a time resources were scarce. In 1923, Germany refused to pay and the French occupied its leading industrial area route to claim their coal. Germany retaliated with passive resistance and printed paper currency recklessly. With too much printed money in circulation, the value of the German mark fell. In April, the US dollar was equal to 24,000 marks. In July, 3,53,000 marks. In August, 4 lakh 46 lakh 21,000 marks at a 98 lakh 860,000 marks by December. The figure had run into trillions. As the value of the mark collapsed, prices of goods soared. Image of Germans carrying cartloads of currency notes to buy a loaf of bread was widely publicized, evoking worldwide sympathy. The crisis came to be known as hyperinflation, a situation when prices rise phenomenally high. Eventually, the Americans intervened and bailed Germany out of the crisis by introducing the Davos Plan, who reworked the terms of reparation to ease financial burden on Germans. The years of depression, the years between 1924 and 28, saw some stability. Yet this was built on sand. German investments and industrial recovery were totally dependent on short term loans, largely from the USA. The support was withdrawn. The Wall Street Exchange crashed in 1929, fearing a fall in prices. People made frantic efforts to sell their shares. One single day, 24 October, 13 million shares were sold. This was the start of the Great Economic Depression. Over the next 3 years, between 1929 and 1932, national income of the US fell by half. Factories shut down, exports fell, farmers were badly hit, and speculators withdrew their money from the market. The effects of these recessions in the US economy were felt worldwide. German economy was the worst hit by the economic crisis. By 1932, industrial production was reduced to 40% of the 1929 level. Workers lost their jobs and were paid reduced wages. Number of unemployed touched an unprecedented 6 million. On the streets of Germany, you could see men with placards around their necks saying, willing to do any work. Unemployed youth play cards or simply sit at street corners or desperately queued up at the local employment exchange. As jobs disappeared, the youth took to criminal activities and total despair became commonplace. Economic crisis created deep anxieties and fears in people. The middle classes, especially salaried employees and pensioners, saw their savings diminish when the currency lost its value. Small businessmen, the self-employed, and retail suffered as their Wall Street Exchange, the name of the world's biggest stock exchange located in the USA, slipping on the line during the Great Depression, and the unemployment could not hope for either wage or shelter. Over they had to pay to sleep like this. Business got ruined. The sections of society were filled with the fear of proletarianization and anxiety of being reduced to the ranks of the working class or worse still unemployed. Only organized workers could manage to keep their heads above water, but employment weakened their bargaining power. Big business was in crisis. The large mass of peasantry was affected by a sharp fall in agriculture prices, and women, unable to fill their children's stomachs, were filled up with a sense of deep despair. Politically, to the Weimar Republic was fragile. The Weimar Constitution had some inherent defects which made it unstable and vulnerable to dictatorship. One was proportional representation. This made achieving a majority by any one party a near impossible task, leading to a rule by coalitions. Another defect was Article 48, which gave the president the powers to impose emergency, suspend civil rights, and rule by decree. Within its short life, the Weimar Republic saw 20 different cabinets lasting on an average 239 days and a liberal use of Article 48. Yet the crisis could be managed. People lost confidence in the democratic parliamentary system, which seemed to offer no solutions. Proletarianization to become impoverished to the level of working class. Hitler's rise to power. This crisis in the economy, polity, and society formed the background of Hitler's rise to power. Born in 1889 in Austria, Hitler spent his youth in poverty. When the First World War broke out, he enrolled for the army, acted as a messenger in the front, became a corporal, and earned medals for bravery. The German defeat horrified him, and the Versailles Treaty made him furious. In 1990, he joined a small group called the German Workers' Party. Subsequently, he took over the organizations and renamed in the National Socialist German Workers' Party. This party came to be known as the Nazi Party. In 1923, Hitler planned to seize control of Bavaria, march to Berlin, and capture power. He failed, was arrested, tried for treason, and later released. Nazis could not effectively mobilize popular support till the early 1930s. It was during the Great Depression that Nazism became a mass movement. As we have seen, after 1929, banks collapsed and businessmen shut down, workers lose their jobs, and the middle class was threatened with destitution. In such a situations, Nazi propaganda stirred hopes for a better future. 1928, the Nazi Party got no more than 2.6% votes in the Reichstag, the German parliament. By 1932, it had become the largest party with 37% votes. Propaganda, a specific type of message directly aimed at influencing the opinion of people through the use of posters, films, speeches, etc. Hitler was a powerful speaker. His passion and his words moved people. He promised to build a strong nation, undo the injustice of Versailles Treaty, restore the dignity of the German people. He promised employment for those looking for work and a secure future for the youth. He promised to weed out all foreign influences, resist all foreign conspiracies against Germany. Hitler devised a new style of politics. He understood the significance of rituals and spectacle in mass mobilization. Nazis held massive rallies and public meetings to demonstrate the support for Hitler and instill a sense of unity among the people. The red banners with the swastika, the Nazi salute, and the ritualized rounds of applause after the speeches were all parts of the spectacle of power. Nazi propaganda skillfully projected Hitler as a messiah, a savior, and someone who had arrived to deliver people from their distress. It is an image that captured the imagination of people whose sense of dignity, pride had been shattered, and who were living in a time of acute economic and political crisis. Destruction of democracy. On 30 January 1933, President Hindenburg offered the chancellorship, highest position in the cabinet of ministers, to Hitler. But now the Nazi had managed to rally the conservatives of their cause. Having acquired power, Hitler set out to dismantle the structure of democratic rule. A mysterious fire that broke out in the German parliament building February facilitated his move. The fire decree of 28 February 1933 indefinitely suspended civic rights like freedom of speech, press, and assembly that had been guaranteed by the Weimar Constitution. Then he turned on his arch enemies, the communists, most of whom were hurriedly packed off to the newly established concentration camps. The repression of the communists was severe. Out of the surviving 6,808 arrest files of Düsseldorf, a small city of half a million population, 1,450 were those of the communists alone. They were, however, only one among 52 types of victims persecuted by the Nazis across the country. On 3rd March 1933, the famous Enabling Act was passed. This act established dictatorship in Germany. It gave Hitler all powers of sideline parliament and rule by decree. All political parties and trade unions were banned except for the Nazi Party and its affiliates. The state established complete control over the economy, media, army, and judiciary. Special surveillance and security forces were created to control and order society in ways that the Nazi wanted. Apart from the already existing regular police in green uniform and the SA or the stormtroopers. This included the Gestapo, secret state police, and the SS Protection Squad, criminal police, and security service. It was the extra constitutional powers of the newly organized forces that gave the Nazi state its reputation as the most dreaded criminal state. People could now be detained in Gestapo torture chambers, rounded up and sent to concentration camps, deported at will or arrested without any legal procedures. The police force acquired the powers to rule with impunity. Concentration camp. A camp where people were isolated and detained without due process of law. Typically, it was surrounded by electrified barbed with fences. Reconstruction. Hitler assigned the responsibility of economic recovery to the economist Jalmer Such, who aimed at full production and full employment through a state-funded work creation program. This project produced the famous German superhighways and the people's car, Volkswagen. In foreign policy also, Hitler acquired quick successes. He pulled out the League of Nations in 1933, reoccupied Rhineland in 1936, integrated Austria and Germany in 1938 under the slogan One People, One Empire, One Leader. He then went on to West German speaking Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia and gobbled up the entire country. In all of this, he had the unspoken support of England, which had considered the Versailles verdict too harsh. These quick successes at home and abroad seemed to reverse the destiny by the country. Hitler did not stop here. Saget had advised Hitler again investing hugely in rearmament as the state still ran on deficit financing cautious people, however, had no place in Nazi Germany. Chazet has to live. Hitler chose war as the way out of the approaching economic crisis. Resources were to be accumulated through expansion of territory. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. This started a war with France and England. In September 1940, a tripartite pact was signed between Germany, Italy, and Japan, strengthening Hitler's claim to international power. Puppet regimes supportive of Nazi Germany were installed in a large part of the Europe. By the end of 1940, Hitler was at the pinnacle of his power. Hitler now moved to achieve his long term aim of conquering Eastern Europe. He wanted to ensure food supplies and living space for Germans. He attacked the Soviet Union in June 1947. In this historic blunder, Hitler exposed the German Western Front of British aerial bombing and the Eastern Front of the powerful Soviet armies. The Soviet Red Army inflicted a crushing and humiliating defeat on Germany at Stalingrad. After this, the Soviet Red Army hounded out recruiting German soldiers until they reached the heart of Berlin, establishing Soviet hegemony over the entire Eastern Europe for half a century thereafter. Meanwhile, the USA had resisted involvement in the war. It has unwillingly to once again face all the economic problems that the First World War has caused. But it could not stay out of the war for long. Japan was expanding its power in the east. It had occupied French Indochina and was planning attacks on US naval bases in the Pacific. When Japan extended its support to Hitler, bombed the US base at Pearl Harbor, US entered the Second World War. The war ended in May 1945 with Hitler's defeat and the US dropping of the atom bomb on Hiroshima in Japan. From this brief account of what happened in the Second World War, we now return to Helmand and his father's story, a story of Nazi criminality during the war. Nazi worldview. The crimes that Nazi committed were linked to a system of belief and set of practices. Nazi ideology was synonymous with Hitler's worldview. According to this, there was no equality between people, but only a racial hierarchy. In this view, blonde, blue-eyed, Nordic German Aryans were at the top, while Jews were located at the lowest rung. They came to be regarded as anti-race, anti-enemies of the Aryans. All other colored people were placed in between depending upon their external features. Hitler's racism borrowed from thinkers like Charles Darwin and Herbert Spencer. Darwin was a natural scientist who tried to explain the creation of plants, animals, through the concept of evolution and natural selection. Herbert Spencer later added the idea of survival of the fittest. According to this idea, only those species survived on Earth that could adapt themselves to changing climatic conditions. We should bear in mind that Darwin never advocated human intervention, in which he thought was a purely natural process of selection. However, his ideas were used by racist thinkers, politicians to justify imperial rule over conquered people. Nazi argument was simple: the strongest race would survive and the weak ones would perish. Aryan race was the finest. It had to retain its purity, become stronger, and dominate the world. Aspect of Hitler's ideology related to the geopolitical concept of Lebanon's or living space. He believed that new territories had to be acquired or settlement. This would enhance the area of the mother country while enabling the settlers on new lands to retain an intimate link with the place of their origin. It would also enhance the material resources and the power of the German nation. Hitler intended to extend German boundaries by moving eastwards to concentrate all Germans geographically in one place. Poland became the laboratory for this experimentation. Establishment of the racial state. Once in power, the Nazis quickly began to implement their dream of creating an exclusive racial community of pure Germans by physically eliminating all those who were seen as undesirable in the extended empire. Nazis wanted only a society of pure and healthy Nordic Aryans. They alone were considered desirable. Only they were seen as worthy of prospering and multiplying against all others who were classed as undesirable. This meant that even those Germans who were seen as impure or abnormal had no right to exist. Under the euthanasia program, Helmut's father, along with other Nazi officials, had condemned to death many Germans who were considered mentally or physically unfit. Jews, Jews were not the only community classified as undesirable. There were others. Many gypsies and blacks living in Nazi Germany were considered as racial inferiors who threatened the biological purity of the superior Aryan race. They were widely persecuted. Even Russians and Poles were considered superman and hence undeserving of any humanity. When Germany occupied Poland and parts of Russia, captured civilians were forced to work as slave labor. Many of them died simply through hard work and starvation. Jews remained the worst sufferers in Nazi Germany. Nazi hatred of Jews had a precursor in the traditional Christian hostility towards the Jews. They had been stereotyped as killers of Christ and usurers. Under medieval times, Jews were barred from owning land, survived mainly through trade and money lending. They lived in separately marked areas called ghettos. They were often persecuted through periodic organized violence, expulsion from the land. However, Hitler's hatred of Jews was based on pseudo-scientific theories of race, which held that conversion was no solution to the Jewish problem. It could be solved only through their total elimination. From 1933 to 1938, the Nazis terrorized, pauperized, and segregated the Jews, compelling them to leave the country. The next phase, 1939 to 45, aimed at concentrating them in certain areas and eventually killing them in gas chambers in Poland. The racial utopia. Under the shadow of war, the Nazis proceeded to realize their murderous racial ideal. Genocide and war became two sides of the same coin. Occupied Poland was divided up. Much of northwestern Poland was annexed to Germany. Poles were forced to leave their homes and properties behind to be occupied by ethnic Germans brought in from occupied Europe. Poles were there herded like cattle in the other part called the general merchant, general government, the destination of all undesirables of the empire. Members of the Polish intelligentsia were murdered in large numbers in order to keep the entire people intellectually and spiritually survived. Polish children who looked like Aryans were forcibly snatched from their mothers and examined by race experts. If they passed the race test were raised in German families, and if not, they were deposited in orphanage, where most perished. With some of the largest genders and gas chambers, the general government also served as the killing fields of the Jews. Exclusion of 1933-1939. You have no right to live among us as citizens. Then Ghettoizations 1940 to 44. Annihilation of 1941 onwards. Youth in Nazi Germany. Hitler was financially interested in the youth of the country. He felt that a strong Nazi society could be established only by teaching children Nazi ideology. This required a control over the child both inside and outside school. What happened in schools under Nazism? All schools were cleansed and purified. This meant that teachers who were Jews or seen as politically unreliable were dismissed. Children were first segregated. Germans and Jews could not sit together or play together. Subsequently, undesirable children Jews, the physically handicapped, gypsies were thrown out of schools. And finally, in the 1940s, they were taken to as the gas chambers. Good German children were subjected to a process of Nazi schooling, a prolonged period of ideological training. School textbooks were rewritten. Racial science was introduced to justify Nazi ideas of race. Stereotypes about Jews were popularized even through Max class. Children were taught to be loyal and submissive, hate Jews, and worship Hitler. Even the function of sports was to nurture a spirit of violence and aggregation among children. Hitler believed that boxing could make up children iron hearted, strong, and masculine. Youth organizations were made responsible for educating German youth in the spirit of National Socialism. 10-year-old had to enter jug work. At 14, all boys had to join the Nazi youth organization, Hitler Youth, where they learned to worship war, glorify aggregation and violence, condemn democracy and hate Jews, communists, gypsies, all those categorized as undesirable. After a period of rigorous ideological and physical training, they joined the labor service, usually at the age of 80. Then they had to serve in the armed forces and enter one of the Nazi organizations. The Youth League of the Nazi was founded in 1922. 4 years later, it was renamed Hitler Youth. To unify the youth movement under Nazi control, all other youth organizations were systematically dissolved and finally banned. Junk work Nazi youth groups for children below 14 years of age. The Nazi cult of motherhood. Children in Nazi Germany were repeatedly told that women were radically different from men. The fight for equal rights for men and women that had become part of democratic struggles everywhere was strong, and it would destroy society. While boys were thought to be aggressive, masculine, and steel hearted, girls were told that they had to become good mothers and rear pure blooded Aryan children. Girls had to maintain the purity of the race, distance themselves from Jews, look after the home, and teach their children Nazi values. They had to be the bearers of the Aryan culture and race. 1933, Hitler said, "In my state, the mother is the most important citizen." But in Nazi Germany, all mothers were not treated equally. Women who bore racially undesirable children were punished, and those who produced racially desirable children were awarded. They were given favored treatment in hospital and was also entitled to concessions in shops and on theatre tickets and railway fares. To encourage women to produce many children, honor crosses were awarded. A bronze cross was given for 4 children, silver for 6, and gold for 8 or more. All Aryan women who deviated from the prescribed code of conduct were publicly condemned and severely punished. Those who maintained contact with Jews, Poles, and Russians were paraded through the town with shaved heads, blackened faces, and placard hanging around their necks announcing, "I have sullied the honor of the nation." Many received jail sentences and lost civic honor, as well as the husbands and families for this criminal offense. The art of propaganda. The Nazi regime used language and media with care, often to great effect. The terms that coined to describe the various practices are not only deceptive, they are chilling. Nazis never used the words kill or murder in the official communications. Mass killings were termed special treatment, final solution for the Jews, euthanasia for the disabled, selection and disinfections. Evacuation meant deporting people to gas chambers. Do you know what the gas chambers were called? They were labeled the disinfection areas and looked like bathrooms equipped with fake shower heads. Media was carefully used to win support for the regime and popularize its worldview. Nazi ideas were spread through visual images, films, radio posters, catchy slogans, and leaflets. In posters, groups identified as the enemies of Germans were stereotyped, mocked, abused, and described as evil. Socialists and liberals were represented as weak and degenerative. They were attacked as malicious foreign agents. Propaganda films were made to create hatred for Jews. The most infamous film was The Eternal Jew. Orthodox Jews were stereotyped and mocked. They were shown with flowing beards, wearing kaftans, whereas in reality it was difficult to distinguish German Jews by their outward appearance. because there was a highly assimilated community. They were referred to as virgin, rats, and pests. Their movements were compared to those of rodents. Nazism worked on the minds of the people, tapped their emotions, turned their hatred and anger at those marked as undesirable. The Nazis made equal efforts to appeal to all the different sections of the population. They sought to win their support by suggesting the Nazis alone could solve all their problems. German farmer, you belong to Hitler. Why? German farmer stands in between two great dangers today. The one danger, American economic system, big capitalism. The other is the Marxist economic system of Bolshevism. Big capitalism and Bolshevism work hand in hand. They are born of Jewish thought and serve the master plan of the world Jewry, ordinary people, and the crimes against humanity. How did the common people react to Nazism? Many saw the world through Nazi eyes and spoke their mind in Nazi language. They felt hatred and anger surge inside them when they saw someone who looked like a Jew. They marked the houses of Jews and reported suspicious neighbors. They genuinely believed Nazism would bring prosperity, improve general well being. But not every German was a Nazi. Many organized active resistance to Nazism, braving police repression and death. The large majority of Germans, however, were passive onlookers and apathetic witnesses. They were too scared to act, to defer, to protest. They preferred to look away. Pastor Niemöller, a resistance fighter, observed an absence of protest, an uncanny silence amongst ordinary Germans in the face of brutal and organized crimes committed against people in the Nazi Empire. He wrote movingly about his silence. First they came for the communist. Well, I was not a communist, so I said nothing. Then they came for the social democrat. Well, I was not a social democrat, so I did nothing. And then came for the trade unions, but I was not a trade unionist. And then came for the Jews, but I was not a Jew, so I did little. Then, when they came for me, there was no one left who could stand up for me. What Jews felt in Nazi Germany is a different story altogether. Carlette Benden secretly recorded people's dreams in her diary, later published them in the highly disconcerting book called The Third Village of Dreams. She described how Jews themselves began believing in the Nazi stereotypes about them. They dreamt of the hooked noses, black hair and eyes, Jews' looks and body movements. The stereotypical images published in the Nazi press haunted the Jews. They troubled them even in their dreams. Jews died many deaths even before they reached the gas chambers. Knowledge about Holocaust. Information about Nazi practices have trickled out of Germany during the last year of her regime. But it was only after the war ended, Germany was defeated, with the world came to realize the horrors of what had happened. While the Germans were preoccupied with their own plight as a defeated nation emerging out of rubble, the Jews wanted the world to remember the atrocities and suffering they had endured during the Nazi killing operations, also called the Holocaust. As it height, a ghetto inhabitant had said to another that he wanted to outline the war just for half an hour. Presumably, he meant that he wanted able to tell the world about what had happened in Nazi Germany. The indomitable spirit to bear witnesses and to preserve the documents can be seen in many ghetto and camp inhabitants who wrote diaries, kept notebooks, and created archives. On the other hand, when the war seemed lost, Nazi leadership distributed petrol to its functionaries to destroy all indiscriminating evidences available in offices. As the history and the memory of the Holocaust live on in memories, fiction, documentaries, poetries, memorables, and museums in many parts of the world today. They are a tribute to those who resisted it, an embarrassing reminder to those who collaborated, and a warning to those who watched in silence. That's all about this chapter. If you are interested, please do like, share, and subscribe my channel. Okay, thank you.